All right, Launch Lab Online, just give us a few minutes to get this uploaded so that we can start our workshop on something that you just asked for yesterday, which was long-term fiscal planning for businesses. So we are really excited that we could turn this around and deliver something to you immediately so that you can start planning. Give us one moment to start our watch party, and then we will introduce our guest and get started for the workshop. You can plan on about 30 to 45 minutes for this workshop, 30 minutes for the content. We are going to have a live Q&A as well. If you missed that downloadable guide for the workshop, it is in the Files tab. I have also marked it as an announcement, so it should appear at the top of your feed, so you can download that and follow along with us as well. Okay, so we are live. Our watch party has started. So welcome Bunker Labs, Launch Lab Online. This is part of our all-in campaign. Bunker Labs is all in for you to elevate you and highlight entrepreneurs, resources, and organizations that can offer things to help us get through this challenging time. But something that you asked for yesterday while we were doing office hours was long-term fiscal planning. So not just about the CARE Act and PPP, but what we can do to fiscally plan for our businesses in the long term. So I am really excited to welcome Renee Bobb, who is our West Region Regional Executive Director. But Renee has a lot of different things in her repertoire. So Renee, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Liz. I do appreciate it. So glad to be here with the Bunker family.
So I'm just going to give a little introduction to Renee. I'm going to have her introduce herself as well. But Renee is a Navy veteran. She is a serial entrepreneur. She is also a radio host. She has several shows. She's had a talk show. She is also the owner of a professional women's basketball team, Music City Icons. And Renee also owns R.B.I. Enterprise, which is part of what we're going to talk about today, of preparing business and empowering businesses. So Renee, I know that wasn't the full bio, but can you give us a little bit of an introduction and context for our presentation today?
I sure can, and you're absolutely right. I am a serial entrepreneur. I actually started my company about a little bit over 20 years ago. When I got out the military, I had the awesome opportunity of serving the United States Navy as a telecommunications operator. And when I made the transition out of the military, I started a training and development firm working with those that were making the transition out to help them to do it holistically. You know, many people join the military in one city and state, and then they get out in a different city and state, and they don't have that support system. So I created a training program to be able to help them to find employment. After doing that for a couple of years, more and more people were like, you know, they really didn't trust the job market, so they wanted to actually start their own business. So I began to study everything I could about entrepreneurship, started going around the country, teaching seminars and workshops. And then people would always say, not to age myself, where is your cassette tape? Where is your VHS tape? Remember those back in the day? And where is your book? So
VHS.
Right, VHS. And so I took the content that I was teaching and put it into a book, and then end up, you know, really getting more into the book publishing. To date, I have 16 books that I've published, and they're mainly around entrepreneurship and training and development.
Aren't you also known as like the book publishing lady? Isn't that like one of your titles?
That's exactly correct, because I teach people how to write, market, and publish their own books, which is another part of a strategic plan to have multiple streams of revenue coming in, especially if you're fluent in a specific area within your business.
I love that point too, because we were actually talking about that a little bit last week, of these streams of revenue, and writing a book or putting out a white paper. Self-publishing is something people probably aren't thinking about, and we definitely haven't talked about, so that's interesting. But Renee, you know, we're here to talk about grant writing today, and you know, Renee is in our group, so if you have questions, I'll post her bio as well. If you have questions for her, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer for them, and we will have a live Q&A after the workshop. But I'm going to let Renee just go ahead and jump in on grant writing so that we can all prepare for the long term for fiscal health of our businesses.
Outstanding. And it's so interesting that the timing of this, I remember back in 2008, and unfortunately my company suffered greatly because I had 95% of my revenue coming from people. And so after the Great Recession, I decided that I was going to create multiple streams of revenue. And one of the ways that I did it was actually by applying for grants and partnering with nonprofit agencies that received grant funding and coming in and physically doing the work that they actually received funding for. So I remember when President Obama at the time, he created a stimulus program, and for people that were dealing with financial issues, they can go to several different nonprofit agencies and receive those funding. So I actually did some research on those nonprofit agencies. I actually put together a proposal of how I could teach people how to get their financial households in order. I could do one-on-one coaching with them. I could do seminars with them. And then also I have a training book that will teach them how to get their financial households in order. So the stimulus grant funding that the nonprofit agencies received, it was for just that. And so it was a great way for me to be able to offer a product and service to individuals to help people, but also support those grant funds that were received from those nonprofit agencies. So I actually put together a proposal. I sent it out to 7 nonprofit agencies, and I won 4 of the 7 grant contracts, which allowed me the opportunity to get some funding to come into my company. It gave me an opportunity to be able to teach people strategies to help them get their financial household in order. And that was kind of the birth of this whole process of actually being a for-profit company and applying for these grant funds and partnering with nonprofit agencies. So I hope that you all have a pen and pad and you had the opportunity to kind of download the handout. And so there are some areas that I want to focus on today. One is understanding the grant funding process, how to prepare yourself to apply for grants, how to build your support system, which means that you're not going to do this by yourself. There are people out there that can help you with the process, how to find grants that are great for your particular company, your product and your service, and also how to create a research and a tracking system as you are actually applying for the grants. So there are 3 important questions that you want to ask yourself before you begin the process. So number 1 is, what do you want? Being crystal clear of how much money you're looking for with your particular company. What is your goal that you have with the money that you're going to apply for? Again, it's important that you're crystal clear about what it is that you desire, because that's going to help as you are applying for the grants. So I do training and development in 4 specific areas: financial empowerment, career development, book publishing, and entrepreneurship. So I'm not going to be applying for grants that deal with culinary or grants that deal with, mechanics, because that's not the areas of my focus. So it's very important that you know what you want. And then the second question is, why are you applying for grants? And Liz did an amazing job talking about planning for the long term. Beyond what's happening now with the SBA, how do you strategically sit down and create a plan where you're going to have other streams of revenue and other ways that you're going to be able to build your company? So what type of product or service are you going to be using the grant funding for to support? Also, the grants that you're applying for, the question number 3 is there truly a need for what you have to offer in the marketplace? So as I'm going through the process, you will be able to kind of, when you're doing the research, only apply for those grants that fit your particular niche that you're actually looking at. It fits your product, it fits your particular service. So again, make sure you're going through and you're answering those 3 questions, and make sure there is truly a need for your product and service when you're applying for grants. So any entrepreneur needs to do that research anyway, to make sure there's a need for what they have to offer in the marketplace. So the next information I want to share with you comes from the website grants.gov. Everyone that's looking for a grant should definitely spend some time at grants.gov. So what is a grant? A grant is a way the government funds your idea and your product to provide public service and stimulate the economy. So, that is so prevalent in the time that we're dealing with right now, where there are grant programs that are developed strictly to actually help stimulate this particular economy. And one of the grant funds that I'm so excited that I was able to qualify for was a program that did workforce development, helping individuals that actually were displaced in the job market, giving them tools and resources to be able to help them to secure employment, because we know with employment, you have the opportunity to be able to stimulate the economy. And so where do grants come from? And so one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have is that grants strictly come from federal funds, and that's not true. You can look at your state and local government. Corporations have grant programs like Miller Lite, Avon, and of course, Oprah Winfrey has an amazing grant program that's available. Community and private foundations, as well as local colleges and universities. And I can remember at one time when they had the Johnson & Johnson, court case that was going on, there was some funds that were donated to the local college, and particularly it was Vanderbilt University. And once Vanderbilt University received these funds, they began to look for agencies that were servicing women. And so they were able to give some grant funding to women entrepreneurs and women nonprofit agencies, because again, that's what the funds were designated for. So when you are doing your research, make sure that you're not only just looking at federal funds, but you're looking in these 4 other areas as well for your particular geographical area where you live. Also, make sure that you study the grants checklist, which is on grants.gov. And regardless of what type of grant you're going to be applying for, this is the step-by-step process that applies to any grant that you're going to be applying for. So first thing you have to do is familiarize yourself with the grant cycle. And what that means that a lot of grants, what they have is a particular date of when you have to apply for that grant. One of the mistakes that a lot of brand new grant entrepreneurs, when they're applying for grants, the mistake that they make is applying after the deadline. And so the deadline is in place for a specific reason. You want to make sure that you submit your grant proposal, on or before the actual deadline. Also, the grant life cycle, some of the grant programs, especially the government programs, they will offer webinars and teleseminars for people that are interested in applying for the grants. And that gives you an opportunity to learn about the grant program and to see if you even qualify for that specific grant. Also, what will save you so much time and energy is making sure that you determine your eligibility for the grant that you're actually applying for. So not every grant is for everybody that's out there. There has specific requirements for the grant, and you want to make sure that you're eligible. So some grants will be for for-profit entities. Some of them will be for nonprofit entities. Some of them will maybe for colleges and universities. So to give you a wonderful example, one of the grants that I had the awesome opportunity of being a part of was with Operation Stand Down. They received a grant from the VA, the Veteran Administration, and it was for weatherization training for military veterans to help them to secure employment in the green industry, which was amazing, the weatherization industry. So on staff, we didn't really have anyone that had that knowledge about the green industry. So we partnered with Tennessee State University, where they had an individual that had a curriculum, that had training materials, that had everything that we needed in the green industry. Then we partnered with Actis Lindley's, who had the people that were already doing the hands-on training. Then we partnered with Fort Campbell Family Housing that had an empty house where we were able to, once the veterans were trained, which means they went through the training with TSU, then they went through the training with Actis Lindley's, and then we took them to Fort Campbell and we were able to do hands-on training. So you see how there were strategic partnerships that were put together in order to be able to qualify for that grant. Also, make sure that you identify the reporting requirements. Keep in mind that you don't ever get something for nothing. So the funds that you actually receive, you're going to have to report on how you actually use those funds. And then also make sure you're searching for specific grants that you're going to apply for, confirm your eligibility, register for grants.com, and again, begin the applying process once you have all those key elements in place. So now I want to talk about getting ready for your grant. So what does it mean to kind of get ready? And I love this component because, you know, as we're going into this different way of doing entrepreneurship, a lot of people have had to kind of step back and look at the market to see, is there truly a need for your product and service in the marketplace? And is there a way that you can begin to pivot? Is there a way that you could begin to shift so that, you know, the product or service that you put in the market, there's truly a need for it? So step number one is to write the vision and make it plain. So as a business owner, you know it's critical that you are crystal clear that you have your mission statement, you have your company and organization vision, which means that it aligns with the product or service that you're putting on the market. What do you do to empower companies? And then also, how do you make money? And so even as a business owner, you have to be crystal clear about how you make money. But when you are applying for grants, they want to make sure that if they give you the grant, if you win the grant, that once you win the grant, that you have a sustainable system of how you're going to continue to operate once the funds are depleted. And if you do not receive the grant, do you have a system in place for sustainability? Step number two, and even as a business owner, you have to have a budget for the project that you're actually applying for. So the main reason for having a budget is that you're going to be crystal clear about how you're going to use those funds. When you're applying for a grant, they will specifically tell you how the grant funds need to be used. So one of the grants that I received was through the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. And with the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, you had to be a nonprofit agency in order to apply for those grants. So I had the training information. I partnered with a nonprofit agency that does green training. We came together, we sat down and wrote the grant together, and we won the funds together. And so we were able to use the funds to train women entrepreneurs in the green industry. So the grant proposal that we submitted was very specific, that we were going to use the funds for training, we were going to use the funds for the materials, we were going to use the funds for anything that applied to making sure that we're delivering what we said we were going to do in that grant proposal. You have to know how much money you need. Another mistake that a lot of new entrepreneurs make when they're applying for grants is they feel like if they under budget and over deliver, then they're going to actually win the grant. And I really do not recommend that. I highly recommend that you are crystal clear about what it costs you in order to fulfill the requirements of the grant, and you apply for that specific money. And then also, how will you sustain your business? You have to have a model in place for sustainability. And then step number three is critical. It's time for you to pull together your team. Who are the people that you're going to have on your team that's going to help you once you win the grant funds? So number one, do you have a mentor? Do you have an expert in your industry that you can lean on, that you can pull from to get some ideas on, you know, once you receive the grant funding, how are you going to utilize and fulfill the needs of that particular grant? I often recommend having an attorney so that when you do win the grant award, that you can have someone that you can sit down with that can read over the grant award document so that you make sure that you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. I recommend making sure that you have an IRS consultant, a tax expert, someone that can make sure that you're doing what you need to do and that you're following the letter of the law when it comes to taxes. Again, if you're a nonprofit agency, you pretty much don't have to worry about that. But for for-profit entities, you have to be able to do your taxes. Also, having a bookkeeping and accountant. So when you win the grant award, back in the day, they used to send you a check. But now they have a repository where they deposit the money in the repository, and then you make a withdrawal that goes into your business account. And so if you are someone that's going to be a subcontractor, which means that a nonprofit agency has won the grant funding and you're coming in to do the work, then they in turn will either do direct deposit or they'll in turn give you a check. Also, insurance. What was interesting about the last couple of grants that I've actually been able to win through nonprofit agencies, they required me to have liability insurance for when I'm doing speaking, teaching, and training, which means that they didn't want to have any of the liability on them. If anything was to happen while I'm teaching, the liability will fall on R.B.I. Enterprise. And then what's interesting is that some of the grant programs required us to have that type of insurance. Social media consultant, marketing, and public relations. If that's not your area of expertise, it may be possible that you can write that type of description in with the grant that you're applying for, because when you win the grant award, you're going to want to make sure that you're shouting from the mountaintop that I've won the grant award, which can actually help you and put you in a position to possibly win other grants as well. A banker, need to have a relationship with the banker, financial planner, grant writer, and we're going to talk more about how to find a grant writer. I also recommend having a professional editor. You want to make sure that before you submit your grant proposal, that you have someone that's making sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. You do not want to submit a grant proposal with a bunch of errors in them. And then also a nonprofit partner. And again, we're going to talk more about that. And again, if you have questions, I'm hoping that you're kind of leaving questions there so I can answer those questions for you. So then step number 4 is, how do you find a really good grant writer? Of course, you can contact your college or university. Don't forget about your adult education center. There may be professors on the college campus or even students on the college campus that are fluent in actually writing grants, and you can kind of find them as a freelancer. Also, tap into some of the nonprofit agencies that may have grant writing services, especially if you're going to do a strategic partnership, which means that the nonprofit agency already has a grant writer on staff. You may be able to utilize that grant writer as you are actually applying for those grants. I know that in the Nashville, Tennessee market, there's the Center for Nonprofit Management, cnm.org, where they have grant writers available to be able to help you to write those and apply for those particular grants. You want to do a Google research, and when you're doing a Google research, you want to identify possibly an award-winning grant writer. And what that means is someone who's successful at winning grants. And then if you get somebody off of Google, you want to make sure that you ask for some references, maybe look at the work that they've done in the past to make sure that they're able, and they're successful, and that they're able to do what needs to be done in order to help you to win the grant, keeping in mind there's no guarantees that just because they write a winning grant that you're actually going to win, because it's very, very, very competitive. And then also you can use freelance sites like freelancer.com, Upwork.com, and then Fiverr, Fiverr.com, are great places to find grant writers. And you too, yourself, may want to take that up as a skill set where you take some online classes to learn the skill about how to actually write a winning grant proposal. Step number 5 is that you must be a team player. Now, this has to be the secret sauce of my success in not only winning grant proposals, but doing strategic partnerships with nonprofit agencies that have won grant funds already. Collaboration is key. So one of the great examples is, I talked about the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, but I had the amazing opportunity to work with Safe Haven Family Shelter, where they actually won $350,000 from Bank of America for workforce development. I came in and was able to do the workforce development training, the coaching, they purchased books, and so on and so forth. So those strategic partnerships are critical. Also, I already talked about the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. Step number 6 is to research nonprofit agencies that do what you do. Now, this is another key secret element which means that the nonprofit agency may have already received funding that's dedicated to do what it is that you are offering, whether it's your product or your service. So, and identifying those nonprofit agencies that are already doing what you actually do, you may be able to come in and do the work for them, because they may have to hire a staff person, give them insurance, have them use their office space. As you, as an independent contractor, you're already doing the work. So think about that for a moment, strategically partnering with somebody that already has the funding, and then you physically go in and you actually do the work. They must see you, you must bring value, of course, to the agency, and they must see you as an asset as opposed to a liability. So one of the agencies that I had 10 contracts with, which was Pathway Women's Business Center. So we received grant funding from the SBA, grant funding from a couple of local nonprofits, grant funding from AARP. They received the funding. Renee Bobb came in with my skill set, and I actually did the training. And one of the grants that we received, which I love, was again from the SBA, because again, I love teaching and training. I had the opportunity to go into the Tennessee Prison for Women and teach women that were incarcerated how to start their own business. I believe that I would not have gotten that opportunity had I not spent time researching and looking for those particular opportunities. Step number 7, you have to create a tracking system, which means that as you are doing research, start to create a list of all the different grants that you qualify for, the deadlines of the grants, the ones that you want to apply for. You want to put those in date order of when those grants are actually due. And then you want to go ahead and apply for those grants and put them in some sort of CRM system, whether it be HubSpot, Zoho is another great one that you can use, where you are keeping a structured management system of the grants that you're actually applying for. Very important. And then also, how do you find some grants? Be prepared to do research. That is the key element. Spending time doing research. I received a message from someone which said that I know that Visa right now has a grant where they're giving away $10,000 to an entrepreneur. And so someone was saying, well, you know, I may get discouraged if I'm applying for a $10,000 grant. Is very competitive. But the key element is not only apply for one, why not apply for one grant every single week until you win one? I mean, you have to go through the process anyway. You have to have your proposal together anyway. You have to have your budget together anyway. So why not add this to your strategic process of actually being able to create, again, more sources of revenue for you? And it's really all about time management as well. You know, that is one of the key elements. So like my day is spent, you know, of course, doing bunker. And then after my day, after 5 p.m., I dedicate at least 2 hours, you know, a week to doing nothing more than researching grant opportunities and also applying for those particular opportunities. And keep in mind that you get exactly what it is that you put in. So a couple of good grants to look at. Of course, we talked about grants.gov. Also, I know quite a few veteran entrepreneurs that have applied for the FedEx Small Grant, where it's pretty much on the voting. Also talked about Community Foundation Middle Tennessee. If you're a woman entrepreneur, look at grantsforwomen.org. Again, it's all about doing the research. So before I get into the question and answer, just want to kind of give you 3 more key elements. 1, make sure you're doing your research. 2, make sure you're submitting your grants on time. And number 3, make sure you check your eligibility, because that will keep you from getting discouraged and keep you from applying for grants that really don't fit what it is that you're trying to do. So Liz, I'm ready now to take on some of these questions.
Renee, thank you so much. You know, and I know a lot of you are commenting. Please drop your questions, you know, go ahead and feel free to, I have a few, but go ahead and drop questions. And if we don't get to them in this time, I'm happy to pass these on to Renee so that she can answer them. And then we'll upload a PDF from answers and questions like we usually do. Anyway, also just encourage you again, go to the Files tab on the left-hand side to download the workbook that Renee is talking about and referencing these different steps. So one of the questions, Renee, is can you talk about how grants can help you to complement or along with federal relief funds? And does receiving federal relief funds like the CARE Act hurt your chances of getting a grant?
That is a very, very good question. And the answer is no, it does not hurt you because they are two separate entities. And so, when you are applying for a grant, it looks good that you have other sources of revenue because their goal is sustainability. Again, they don't want to give you funding and after you use the funds, the business kind of folds. So they like the fact that you have other sources of revenue that are feeding you every day, every week, every month, and every year. Very good question.
That's awesome. And as I go off mute here, I apologize for the whatever the yard work that apparently is going on, if you can hear that. So another question is, how early is too early stage for an entrepreneur to apply for grants? And do you know about any pre-revenue grants?
So I'm not familiar with any pre-revenue grants, but I feel like once you are crystal clear about number one, who your target audience is, which means that you're crystal clear about your avatar, who you're going to be selling your products and your services to. Number two, I am a strong believer, and I know I'm going to get some eyebrows now and some sucking of teeth, but I'm a believer in the business plan. I believe that you should have a roadmap that's going to take you from point A to point Z. How are you going to operate the business on a day-by-day basis? I think it's critical that you have all of those key elements in place. And once you have your strong business plan in place, you have your sales model in place, you have your marketing and advertising in place, you have your avatar, you know who you're going to target, you know how you're going to make money, you know how you're going to sustain your business, then it's time for you to jump out there and actually start applying for grants because some of these grants are actually strictly geared towards startup. So there's funds that you can use in order to actually jumpstart your particular company.
That's great. Awesome. And another question that comes up actually a lot in our group, which is, which came up for the CARE Act. If you're a sole proprietor, solopreneur, what are some best practices for you to apply for grants, knowing that you might have to contract out some of the work that is required in the grant?
So hopefully, eventually, depending on your type of business, you may want to get to the point where you're actually set up as a limited liability corporation. But as a sole proprietorship, it's those strategic partnerships, which is critical. And what's interesting is that the grant requirements will tell you if you have to be an LLC, if you can be a sole proprietor, or if you have to be a nonprofit. So make sure you check the requirements that you're going to need. I know for some of the grants that I've gotten, even as a sole proprietor before I did the LLC, and I had to subcontract the admin, I made sure that I wrote that into the grant when I actually applied. And again, I made sure that I looked at the requirements, which said that you can subcontract the work out. And one day, Liz, we have to do a training on subcontracting because I am like the queen of subcontracting. That is how I built my company. And I believe in, utilizing other types of platforms in order to be able to grow your company. You don't have to do it by yourself. There's nothing wrong with strategic partnership, especially if you have a specific area of expertise where you are going to be enhancing what somebody is already out there doing.
That's a great idea. And that comes up a lot. So I'm going to take you up on that, Renee, for sure. So another question is, and maybe this is actually kind of interesting, is what are some best practices for speaking with the grant organization in the preparation stage, and what's off limits, and what should you do in terms of clarifying what they're asking for in the grant?
So first things first is, of course, making that list of nonprofit agencies or college and universities or the grants that you actually want to apply for. And what's interesting is that a lot of these grant entities, they look forward to you asking questions because, again, some of them already have the funds allocated and they're looking for strategic partnership. But a lot of them will actually have webinars and teleseminars and give you a platform and an opportunity where you can ask those questions and get any type of clarifying information. And I think that I'm not sure of the question about what's off limits, because I think that, especially if you have a product or service that's going to enhance what they're doing, they are open to actually receiving your information. And I think maybe it may be around competition. And so I don't look at it as competition. I look at it as collaborating, where I'm going to be bringing something that's going to enhance what it is that they're actually already doing.
That's great. Yeah. And I think it's more of like the communication, like to your point. And so another question is, why is this COVID-19 a good time to apply for grants as opposed to, you know, the loans that have kind of forgiveness as well, like the CARE Act and things like that? Why is this a good time to look at the more traditional grants?
And I would have to say, why not do both? You know, the wonderful thing about the ultimate goal is, how do you get enough revenue to sustain your business? How do you get enough revenue in order to grow your business as well? And so there's nothing wrong with doing them both at the same time. But I'm hoping that because of this, because of what's going on right now with the virus, is that it motivates you to create multiple ways that you can sustain your business. The grants, again, you know, you don't have to pay those back, but the requirements are that you have to do what you say you're going to do with the funds that you actually receive.
That's a
So,
great point. Yeah, the delivery, right? It has to be the delivery. So this is another question, and I know that you have some specific expertise around this. So, do you need to be registered as a veteran-owned small business, disabled veteran-owned small business, have a SAM code, have a DUNS number to apply for grants?
you don't have to have it, but it definitely does help. So there are some grants that been able to contract because I am minority, woman, entrepreneur, veteran, disabled veteran. So those grants that are available that have all of those requirements, when you are looking at strategic partner, it makes you even more qualified, because you are able to check off all those boxes. So I highly recommend going through the process and getting the certification, even though it's not a requirement, but it really does put you in the best light and help you. Because again, those that receive the grant funding, they're looking for you. They're looking for the veteran, the minority, the disabled, and so on and so forth, because they end up getting credit for having individuals that meet those requirements. So it's really a good thing.
So go ahead and get those in place. And
Yeah.
also, you know, I'm just going to reiterate here, because this is something we talk about a lot. Government contracts, you do have to have that stuff.
Yeah.
So you have to have those numbers, you have to have those certifications. So why not just go ahead so that you have them in place, you know, right, that preparation piece. So our last question is, and I like this because I think, you know, is there a basic template for asking nonprofits that you're interested in a strategic partnership with, a basic outline that would be willing, that you'd be willing to share with us, as, you know, and I think this is around, like, how do you start that conversation? You know, it's kind of like cold calling. So how do you put something in place to add the value, just so that the value looks like a two-way street of what you can offer one another in applying for these grants?
Very, very good question. I would love to be able to share that template. So the step for me is, step number one is kind of researching all the nonprofit agencies that have received funding, doing what it is that I do. Step number two is identifying, how do I create value for that nonprofit agency or that corporation or that grant entity. Step number three is that I pick up the telephone and I call, you know, or I'm sending out an email to make that first introduction. Once I'm able to get in contact with, whether it be the executive director or the grant manager, you know, I am trying to set up a meeting to show them how I can create value, how I can save them money, how I can save them time with the products and services that I offer. Once we've gotten to that point, then I send them over a proposal which kind of outlines the services and the products that I'm going to be offering in order for them to be able to fulfill that grant requirement. So I'll be more than happy to share with you the proposal and the templates that I actually use.
Yeah, and I will share too, we're going to work on getting these resources from Renee up on our main resource page. I will, once she shares the template, it will be available in our private group in the files section on that left-hand side. So along with this guide, I'll make sure to upload those so you guys can download them and resource. But Renee and I are also working on putting some of these resources on the greater resource page so that you have access to those. So Renee, Bobb, thank you so much. We're getting so much great feedback, and our community members are saying that was short and sweet. Thank you so much. Lots of information packed into that 40 minutes. We got to a lot of questions. I have a few questions that we didn't get to, but I will send those to Renee and have her answer them. She is on our Bunker Labs team and our Bunker Labs family, which we're so happy to have her. But Renee, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. I truly do appreciate it. And the last thing I want to say is please step out on faith and go ahead and go through the process and apply for the grants. It can change everything with your business.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much. I'm so happy to be part of this community, to offer this value to the community. If you need me, you know where to find me. Renee, myself, I think from the rest of the Bunker Labs family, we are all in for you. We're here for you. So please let us know how we can support your business. And this is one step, applying for grants, that you can take on the responsibility for your business and fiscal longevity. Thanks so much.
Thank you.